Are Prince Harry and Meghan Markle creatively bankrupt? Hello everyone, welcome to Royal News Network. My name is Brittany, and today we are talking about the very curious and strange case of Harry and Meghan's latest documentary series, which is going to debut on Netflix on December 31st. And it's a series of interviews with some high-profile people where they talk about leadership. There's allusions to Nelson Mandela, but how Harry and Meghan got attached to this is really fascinating, and I think really shows that Netflix knows that Harry and Meghan, they don't have the creative chops to make things work. And so they are having to glom onto a project that has probably been done for about 2 years now to get it to limp over the finish line finally. And when you really think about it, knowing that Netflix purchased this in 2021 and it wasn't until 2022 that Harry and Meghan finally were attached to it and all these sorts of things. And the original interviews, some of them were completed all the way back in 2019. That's almost 4 years ago. And what that says to me is that this product, it ain't that good. And so Netflix needs to get somebody to get it across the finish line. And wouldn't you know it, Harry and Meghan, they don't really have much creative chops either. So why not meld the two together? I think that's what's happening here. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of indications why I think that is. In addition, we also have the component where it's basically causing a diplomatic incident because the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she was attached to this project. She gave an interview. Well, now King Charles is head of state of her country, and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been making some very serious and very vague accusations against her head of state, which puts her in a very precarious situation. But again, I think it goes to show that despite Harry and Meghan's great proclamations that they're going to be these great movers and shakers in Hollywood, I just don't think they have the chops to get it done. So Netflix, they need this thing that they bought a couple years ago, which I don't think they think is very good, to limp across the finish line. And why not go ahead and get Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to do some narration and say it's presented by them, even though they really had absolutely nothing to do with it. And isn't that interesting? But I think it goes to show that Netflix, if Netflix wanted Harry and Meghan to be attached to a better project, they would do it. But I think they know, and we're starting to know too, that Harry and Meghan, they just don't have it in them. They don't have it in them to make themselves this great success in Hollywood. And in fact, they're not the creatives they think they are. And that's going to be a huge problem for them. But if you guys haven't been here to Royal News Network before, like I said, my name is Brittany, and on this channel I provide compelling royal commentary on the latest news and sometimes a bit of gossip too. So if you guys want to subscribe, that would be awesome. I will also be reviewing television shows and movies and sharing a bit of history too. So I would love to have you guys come back. And next week I'll be doing a wrap up, looking at the best and worst moments of the year, scandals, those sorts of things. So I'll be doing a couple of videos like that next week, and I would love to have you back. I've hit 75,000 subscribers, and I know it's the last couple weeks to the new year, but how cool it would be to get as close to 100K as I can, because I only started uploading videos in March, so it'd be really cool to hit that incredible goal in less than a year. I definitely know I'll hit it in less than a year, but to hit it before even the new year would be fabulous. But obviously that remains to be seen. But like I said, let's get into this, because I think this is truly a fascinating conundrum that Harry and Meghan are in, and that they have to create creative content, but I don't think they have the creative chops to actually do it. And this documentary series is a microcosm of how the problems that they are going to be facing for the next couple of years, because unfortunately for them, they have to produce content, or they have to get on the groundwork of something and build it up and be able to take a step back. And I think because they don't have the creative juices to do that, they have to insert themselves into something that's already completed, because they can't really, they're unable to actually produce something original by themselves, or get onto something that's already in production, just have your name attached to it and just take your hands off after that. And I will give you a couple of examples of how I have seen other executive producers do this, and how Harry and Meghan are going in the utterly opposite direction. And I think, again, this is going to be a huge, huge problem for them going forward. And I will say from the outset, if Harry and Meghan can become these great creatives, creating, let's say, great documentary series and all these sorts of things, and be able to take a step back and not shove themselves into it, because shoving yourself into it, I think, makes you look weak, because it makes it look like you have to get in it and show how much a part of it you are even if you had absolutely nothing to do with the vast majority of the work that's already gone into this. And that's the case with this latest documentary series, which was actually started by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And it sounds like most of these interviews were completed in 2019. That's 3 years ago. That's before the pandemic and everybody locked down and people didn't go out of their country. So many things have changed between when these interviews were first taken and when now they're airing on Netflix. I mean, even Harry and Meghan's lives, it's changed drastically for them. And I will say, I don't think this documentary series will do very well without a big name attached. But what is this? So apparently this program is going to be called Live to Lead. And of course, they've interviewed Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Gloria Steinem. They're interviewing Greta Thunberg, Jacinda Ardern, who is the New Zealand Prime Minister. She has been included on this as well. And go ahead and just take a brief look here at a bit of the trailer.
Leadership mainly means by example. We do what we see way, way, way more than what we're told.
The work that we do off the field is the most important.
Now, I will say, I just showed you guys the people of those who they are featuring, and they showed this interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and they showed the clapping of the hand, you know, to signal that the take is starting. And I'm like looking at that going, wait, she died like a couple of years ago now. Well, apparently, yeah, because this was done in 2019. And so they've been sitting on this for a really long time. And apparently it was started by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And it says, the foundation is proud to announce the launch of a new Netflix series on effective leadership in collaboration with Blackwell and Ruth and Archwell Productions, inspired by the legacy of Nelson Mandela. But of course, it has to be presented by Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That's what it says on the end of this tag. And I feel like they've taken over this a smidge. So go ahead and take a watch at a bit of their sections here, because they're the really ones who have introduced this trailer.
This was inspired by Nelson Mandela, who once said, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived.
It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead."
So this has been, I think, again, super fascinating to look at in terms of where Harry and Meghan are at. Now, it could be seen as a couple different ways. The Nelson Mandela Foundation knew that nobody really cared about this series because they had filmed this in 2019 and they had plans to do all these things. And I think the pandemic and stuff did slow that down. But I honestly think I wasn't that impressed with what I saw. I actually watch a ton of documentary series. I watch a ton of even documentary series on YouTube of people show stories about what has happened to real people, unique and interesting things. And I find those fascinating because oftentimes what has happened in real life is so much stranger than what's happened in fiction. And I don't like how they have interviewed people with the stark white background. I don't like that. I like a more homey appearance in terms of having them be in their home with nice lighting and those sorts of things, or in their office. At least a couple of them, it's just like this stark white background. And maybe it'll change in the actual series, and maybe that's just what they did for the trailer. But overall, that didn't interest me. And I will say as well, some of the people chosen have a particular political background that I think would appeal to people of a particular political persuasion. Now, that's not necessarily bad. What I am saying, though, is that the broad appeal, going after people who don't really have a specific subset of people who they appeal to. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she is really an icon of the left. She doesn't really have much appeal to the right, really. So I feel like that is automatically people are going, and then you have Greta Thunberg as well, and she kind of appeals to more one political side of the aisle. And most of the people in this documentary series do. So I don't think if the Nelson Mandela Foundation was hoping that this would have a broad appeal, I don't think it will, because you obviously have one political group you're looking at. But of course, I digress. But anyways, so they've attached Harry and Meghan to this project, and to a certain extent, it does make sense. So they have to get this project over the finish line. And to be quite frank, I don't think anybody was interested. And that's why it took so gosh darn long for them to get it anywhere. Is that people watched it and were like, nah. No, it's obviously just not either that interesting, or it just doesn't have a broad appeal, because executives at Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV Plus, those sorts of stations are looking at something that will interest people. And this thing obviously did not. If it was languishing on a shelf for years, there's a reason why it wasn't good. Or it just didn't, no executive saw that great of interest in it. So along come Harry and Meghan to save the day. What are they going to do? They're going to attach themselves to this series and they're going to introduce it and present it and become executive producers and help it get over the finish line. Oof. As these interviews have been conducted 3 years ago, how applicable are they to people anymore? I have no idea. I have no idea how applicable any of this is to people. So really, Harry and Meghan are going in and saving a sinking ship, much like their own brand. And I don't think this is a particularly good move for them, especially because it's resulted in a lot of backlash already, including Jacinda saying, it's taking one giant step back and going, I have never talked to anybody associated with Harry and Meghan, and basically I don't want to be totally associated with them. This was a project that was completed years ago, and I thought it was going certain places, and it just never went anywhere, and they're just helping here at the end. So this is what the Times of London has said about this, because they were the ones who broke Jacinda's side of the story. Valentine Lowe, who wrote the Courtiers book that I have to read, and includes things about what happened with Harry and Meghan and everything, he said it was not so much a snub, more of a diplomatic put down. But there was no mistaking the meaning when Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, when her office issued a statement saying her involvement in a new Netflix series on effective leadership was nothing to do with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Even though they're presenting it. It does have to do with them, but not when it was initially created. And that's what she goes into. However, Ardern's office has issued a statement in response to media questions saying that her involvement had nothing to do with Harry and Meghan, who only joined the production at the later stages. The statement said in early March 2019, so again, this is almost now hitting on 4 years ago. So when this releases, it's a couple months shy of being 4 years since this interview was taken. I don't even know why they're releasing this anymore. It's pointless, but whatever. In early March 2019, the Prime Minister was approached by the Mandela Foundation to participate in a project to develop accessible resources on key attributes of leadership targeted at aspiring young leaders around the world based off a 1-hour interview. Originally, we were advised the outputs would be printed in digital books, short films, and audiobooks. The interview was conducted on November 8th, 2019. So they started the project 4 years ago. It's been a little over 3 years since the initial interview was taken. In March 2020, a short book entitled Jacinda Ardern, I Know This to Be True, was published based on the interview. Other participants who also had their contributions published based on their interviews included the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the feminist activist Gloria Steinem, the climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, and American basketball player Stephen Curry. In March 2021, the Mandela Foundation advised the Prime Minister's office they had secured an agreement with Netflix to broadcast a series of interviews, including the 2019 interview with the Prime Minister. In May this year, the Prime Minister's office was notified that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would introduce the series, noting this was nearly 2.5 years after the interview had been recorded and permission for its use by the Mandela Foundation had already been provided. All communication has been with the foundation. There has been no communications with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex regarding this project. Again, it's a very subtle diplomatic way of saying, okay, Harry and Meghan are attached to this now, but they weren't on any of the process I was on. I've never talked to them, they're people, anything, and I'm totally fine with that. There was nothing like, well, let's just update the interviews and everything. And I really do feel like, based on how old this is, how applicable is it? Especially if you are the Prime Minister of New Zealand, your leadership has gone through the ringer during the pandemic. So what you said then be as applicable as now? I'm not sure, but it seems like Netflix picked up a dud and they were trying to offload it. So the best thing they could do was go, Harry and Meghan, you aren't doing diddly squat, so let's get you on here. Maybe, just maybe, you can get this over the finish line if we slap your names up there. And Harry and Meghan, of course, are glad to do that. And I think that's the problem. Now, granted, obviously, executive producers are there to help. And I think that happens with a lot of documentaries. The documentarian starts it, and then he is able to crowd fund through various sources. And I find an interesting comparison is the volcano, which just debuted on Netflix recently. It covers the volcano in New Zealand, actually, that exploded in 2019 in December. And so the executive producers, as I was watching it, their names came up, and it was Ron Howard, Brian Grazer, who is a huge executive producer in Hollywood. He's done a ton of films. Ron Howard is obviously a very famous director, and he was on Happy Days and The Andy Griffith Show, in addition to Leonardo DiCaprio. Those guys were all executive producers on this show. Did we see hide nor hair of them? No. Did I hear any voiceover done by Leonardo or Ron Howard or anything? No. Their job was to be there as financial to help get the project across the finish line. And Harry and Meghan, I feel like, are fitting the same role, but it's also very concerning that they are taking a very active role, I feel like, in probably narrating and providing context and going through these various hoops to try to make this series somewhat interesting. Because unfortunately, again, I don't think this thing would have done well regardless of anybody attached to it. I just think Netflix realized pretty quickly that it didn't hold any interest, because you got to think itself, Netflix bought this thing over a year ago and still hasn't aired it. Documentaries are not that hard to produce, really. They are challenging in certain respects, but this should have been aired much earlier than now. For it to sit on the shelf, again, implies to me that this is a crappy product. And so Harry and Meghan, because they also are a crappy product, got roped into it going, well, you have name recognition. Let's see if people are interested in watching if you're there and you're narrating. But it does cause a bit of a conundrum too, because you got to think, Jacinda, she's like, hey, I don't want anything to do with them because I'm the Prime Minister of New Zealand. My head of state now is King Charles, the guy that Harry and Meghan are feuding with. That's a huge problem. But I think the bigger issue here for me is what I see is that Harry and Meghan, they don't really have any creative talent. And I think Netflix knows it too. And that's why Netflix is like, hey, we have this project. We know you're here twiddling your thumbs. We know you're here trying to be the perfectionist and they're doing these grand things. We don't care. We need you to do this because we spent money on this and we can't sell it. So get your behinds over here, do these intros for us. And Harry and Meghan are like, well, yes, because they don't have to do anything. They don't really have to do anything. All this has been done for them. They're just been either voluntarily or told, hey, you need to introduce these so we can actually try to force people to watch this. And I think both that's incredibly sad. And I also think it goes to show that Netflix doesn't really have any faith in its Harry and Meghan products, because again, if they had faith in this product beforehand, it would have aired. If they had faith in Harry and Meghan and they knew this product was crappy, they wouldn't attach them to it. So I think it's a reflection of the fact that Harry and Meghan, they're not making good inroads here. Although their Netflix reality series, hey, it got a lot of views. So in that way, Netflix is happy. It's been slammed by everyone. Critics hate it. The public hates it. People hate Harry and Meghan more. And Netflix is looking, going, okay, we've attached them to a $100 million deal. Will we get a return on our investment? Because they had this one thing they could sell us, which was their time in the royal family. Most people hated it. So now, what else are they going to do? Are they going to actually be able to create more content, original content, interesting content? Netflix is thinking everything is about Harry and Meghan is a huge risk for them. Will it convert? Will it perform the way they want it to? And I think they are definitely very much questioning that, because people turned in for the car wreck factor. They turned in for the accident factor. People want to watch the catastrophe. There is something in us as human beings where we're just fascinated by the horror. Public executions were actually entertainment events way back in the day. They were very much things people came to. And so I feel like Harry and Meghan, they fit that mold. People watch the car wreck, but do they convert in other ways? And I think the question is can Harry and Meghan actually create their own content? And I don't think that's the case. And just think about this as well, is that if this piece was already crummy and Harry and Meghan watched it and knew it was crummy, but was so desperate for something to actually attach to because they can't create something on their own, that they went ahead and did it knowing it wasn't a good product. That could entirely be the case. And again, it just goes to show, I think, that Harry and Meghan, can they create something beyond themselves? Pearl failed. Netflix, knowing Meghan and Harry's name recognition, Pearl would have gone ahead if there wasn't either catastrophic problems with the production, the storyline, the artwork. There was something wrong. Otherwise, I think it would have gone through. Even though animation is more expensive, you do have the attachment to Meghan Markle, and she is a notable high-ranking name that most cartoons, especially children's cartoons, don't have. And so that they said, no meant there was just something wrong with that production or the creative process behind it. And it just wasn't even worth them pursuing. And you got to wonder too, they have supposedly an Invictus Games documentary coming out. I was a huge fan of Invictus, but because of Harry and Meghan's association with it, I don't feel I can support it as well, because I don't know where the money for the Invictus Games is going. Is it really going to the troops? Is it really going to the events? Or is it going to fund Meghan Markle's wardrobe when she attends, because she's getting an appearance fee now, because her husband is the head of it and he's getting an appearance fee now, even though as royals, they would have done all of it for free. Catherine and William don't make any money for going to and setting up the Earthshot Prize ceremony. That's why I'm like, if I could pay to go, I would go and support it, because I'm like, I know you guys aren't making any back-end funds from doing some type of charitable work, and this charity that you have is growing and giving money to others. Harry and Meghan, we don't know if that's the case anymore, because they have to make money some way. So are they using their charities now to make money for themselves? That's a huge question. Meghan Markle had a $65,000 wardrobe at the Invictus Games, and she was there 2.5 days. There's no excuse for that level of excess, really. And of course you need to dress nicely, but she had like a $500 pair of jeans. She had all this stuff that was very, very pricey, and this Cartier necklace that costs, you know, at least 10 to 20 grand, and all these various things where it's like, did you really need to spend that much to support a charity? Wouldn't it be better spent for that money to actually go to the charity? And then you're wondering, did she pay that much in clothing because the charity was covering it in some way, because Netflix was covering it some way? And again, that just puts a lot of questions in your mind. So the question is, will the Invictus documentary do well? And will Harry and Meghan, basically because they've inserted themselves into this one, will they be actually the main focus of the Invictus Games documentary instead of the soldiers? That's a huge question. And when will this come out? They filmed the content in April. It will be a year ago. So where is this? There's just no reason for all this dragging a feet. And I think that's a huge, huge problem for Harry and Meghan going forward, is that I don't think they have the creative juices to do this. Just because you're a mediocre actress doesn't make you a great executive producer. Now, some people have jumped that ship, but a lot of them haven't. And there's a reason you weren't that successful in Hollywood before. It's because you weren't necessarily hugely talented, and you weren't so beautiful that even though you weren't hugely talented, you could get into the various things. And that's just basically stating facts. I mean, Megan Fox is a mediocre, I don't think she's a great actress, but she's gorgeous. So I feel like sometimes if you are really stunningly beautiful, yes, you do get parts that you probably never normally would, because you are just physically that attractive. So this is what Harry and Meghan have to do. Create new content. Don't attach your names to an already crappy product. We know it was probably crappy because they couldn't sell it before. So don't attach your names to that. Create new original content, then you can put yourselves in that. But if you're even smarter, you actually help create original content and take a step back and let the people who are telling the story really be the stars of the show. Because what Harry and Meghan are doing, I feel like, is taking over this product, even though they really had nothing to do with it. They were probably either contractually obligated, forced to, or volunteered to do this so they could have something to promote. And I don't think this thing will do very well, because they're already so oversaturated and people are kind of getting sick of them. I feel like even on my own channel, people get sick of Harry and Meghan from time to time. I do want to do a video discussing basically who's the most hardworking royal, so I think I'll work on that here before too long. And I got the end of the year videos to do and those sorts of things. But I feel like Harry and Meghan here, they're in a really, really tough spot. But they're the ones that got themselves into this. If Harry and Meghan want to be in Hollywood, they want to be these big name producers, you have to produce something. You can't just complain and play the victim and expect to get ahead. That works for a period of time, but you're in the big leagues now. You actually need to create something. Whatever it is, regardless of what it is, it needs to be creative, it needs to have an impact. If not, you'll get more crappy products like this to promote. So looking at all this together, you could actually make this really fascinating inference, is that Netflix bought this series, watched it, or they watched it before and realized this is going to be a hard sell. They just didn't really think anybody would watch these very well. So what they decided to go do was, okay, so we've attached ourselves now to Harry and Meghan. Harry and Meghan, they don't seem to be doing much. Hey, Nelson Mandela Foundation, why don't you go ahead and have Harry make a speech for you at the UN to an empty building? That would be awesome. That way we can maybe start promoting things a bit. And guys, I just realized this, but Prince Harry's speech to the UN, occurred in May of this year. And when did Netflix connect Harry and Meghan with this documentary? May this year. Coincidence? I think not. And then we can have Harry and Meghan, they can do this narration bit for this series. And Harry and Meghan, they're contractually obligated to do so. Why? Because they've sold their souls, essentially. They've sold themselves to Netflix and Spotify in order to pay for their exorbitant lifestyle. Specifically Meghan's, I think. I think she spends vastly more than Harry does. And we've seen her just in tons of designer duds since she's married into the royal family. She's always wanted this access to massive quantities of cash. She's always wanted to be rich and famous. She even said that in her yearbook. She wanted to be rich and famous. But there's a price for that. And in order to be rich and famous in Hollywood, at some point you do need to be an actual talent. You need to have an actual talent doing something. And I feel like that's where Harry and Meghan, the rubber is meeting the road. They don't have it. And I think Netflix knows it, and I think Spotify knows it. And so Netflix knows that they probably pitched a bunch of things to Netflix. They pitched a good game initially, but since they got signed on, they're just pitching thing after thing, and Netflix is going, we're losing subscribers and that sounds awful. Nah, I don't think so. Your idea of a romantic comedy is kind of bad. So Netflix is going, okay, so we have this crummy product over here and we have this crummy investment over here. Let's marry the two together and maybe some people will watch it. Now, this could be a fantastic documentary series. I'm not saying that that couldn't be possible, but what I am saying is that this thing sat on the shelf for a really long time with some pretty big names attached. And you gotta wonder, was it just not very good? And I understand the pandemic was in the middle of that, but there's still a good year or two where that wasn't necessarily the huge hindrance it was back in early 2020. And you just gotta wonder, why was nobody picking it up? And I would argue that it was because it was pretty crummy. So they are like, okay, well, Harry and Meghan, well, they have name recognition. Maybe we can get them to present this because we know they're just not going to create much else. It's an interesting thought process, isn't it? And again, all this stuff, this is complete and total speculation. But I know when there's a good product, when there's a really good documentary series, when there's a really, really good people behind it, people just jump at it. I love the Cecil Hotel documentary on Netflix. It is fabulous. I think it's super interesting. And it was also produced by Ron Howard and Brian Grazer, who had no part in it whatsoever. And it documents a bit of the history of the Cecil Hotel and then how it became kind of infamous for this video of this woman who was unfortunately having a mental health episode in an elevator, and this footage went viral, and how the whole media and the world spiraled, especially on YouTube, spiraled down this hole of investigating, trying to figure out, posing various theories, and how at the end of the day the final conclusion was, to a certain extent, somewhat banal, but was fascinating to watch the human interactions behind it and this whole chaos and collapse, this whole social media generated obsession with this particular video and with this woman. It was super interesting. And when you have great products like that, you don't need the hard sell. You don't need Ron Howard to get up there and give an intro to this, because it's already a great piece. And that's why I think Harry and Meghan, I actually changed my thought process on this video a bit as I was talking about it, realizing I think it's a crummy product, and I think Harry and Meghan were a crummy investment, and everybody's like, hey, why don't we shove these things together and see if it helps? And I think that is indicative of the fact that Harry and Meghan, they're not doing well in Hollywood, and that just doesn't bode well for their future. They need to do things well. They need to have a huge reaction. They have a hugely expensive lifestyle. Will they be able to maintain it? And will Hollywood continue to give them the time of day? Or will at some point everybody go, you know, you guys aren't that great and what you're producing isn't that interesting and we're all kind of done now. So it'll be fascinating to see where this lands. But I really think Harry and Meghan, I'm sorry, but to really succeed in Hollywood, you actually need to have talent and creative juice. And I don't think either of you guys have it. And I think Netflix knows it. And I think that's why they stuck you with this project. So guys, what do you think of my theory? What do you think of the fact that this was a little bit of a diplomatic incident, including Janissa in here, and how that may come back to bite Harry and Meghan? I would love to hear your thoughts about all this. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again really, really soon. Bye.